Nothing Personal starts in 30 seconds. It's just business. This is Nothing Personal. Devastation. That's the Nothing Personal word of the day. It is Thursday, October 10th, 2024. Hurricane Milton made landfall sometime early evening to last night, and videos were pouring in all over from drones, giving you a perspective that you normally wouldn't get until the next morning, from people who were staying to film, which is now a thing. And we saw on the west coast of Florida something that on the east coast of Florida you never want to see, but it was reminiscent of the worst we've ever seen on the East Coast, as we had predicted. And the devastation is something where the storm lasts quick, an hour. The cleanup lasts years. Dan Le Batard is here. Fourth day we get Dan. Who gets Dan 4 days in a row other than his loyal audience on the Dan Le Batard show with Stu Gatz, which is going to happen live at 9 a.m. Dan, thank you for your week. Let's start there.
Thank you for having me. I know it has been turbulent for all parties involved. My audience doesn't like having you around. My employees don't seem to like having you around. Your audience doesn't seem to like having me around. Your employee doesn't seem to like having me around. But I have been thrilled to do this with you. I have enjoyed it. And yes, it was hard to watch some of what it is that happened last night, even though here in South Florida we were largely unscathed, barely any rain where I was, but it was hard to watch what was happening on the west coast of Florida.
It really put things into perspective for me. Sports somehow is the central theme that is used for everything except politics. Sometimes it mixes with politics, but the storm was getting attention. But it got the most attention when videos started coming in about what happened to where the Tampa Bay Rays play in Tampa, and the roof started peeling off. And all of a sudden, you're watching the video now on the Nothing Personal with David Samson YouTube channel, or if it's just a little after 10 a.m. Eastern, you're on the DraftKings network. And if you look at what's coming off, that is not paneling. The top of Tropicana Field. Have you ever been to the catwalks?
Yes.
In Tropicana Field? It's a fascinating thing.
It's one of the worst ballparks in the history of Major League Baseball. It is old and outdated as a warehouse, and watching the roof come off it was pretty horrifying.
You may be old enough to remember that when it was the Thunderdome. And the reason why it was the Thunderdome is when there are storms in Tampa, they play on because it's a roof, and you hear the thunder, and you play through the thunder in a way that is incredibly bizarre and scary. And so it used to be the Thunderdome, of course, until corporate money came in. And then it became the Tropicana, and there's this big orange juice thing in right field. But the roof is made, if you go up there, and I learned about this in building Marlins Park, it's like a tent top. It's not what you'd think of as shingles. It's not concrete. It is canvas.
Yeah, it's very thin. I think the Carrier Dome is something similar to this. I believe the Carrier Dome has more snowfall on it than just about any place in the United States, and they have to keep it that way in order to keep it pressurized correctly. It is weird. It's like the material of T-shirts.
And so when it starts peeling, and this is what happens in a hurricane and the debris and why you put shutters up, people think shutters are, people think shutters are for the wind. I learned when I moved to Florida, shutters are for the flying debris to stop them from breaking your window. But once you have a roof that begins, and the first shot we saw was the beginning of the peeling. And then before you know it, once it starts, that's it. The whole roof is basically gone. And there was a mistake that was done on social media that I wanted to correct, because I would have been very worried for anyone who was using that as a shelter. When the roof comes off.
People saw that it was littered with cots as the storm came, and so they might have thought that that was a place that, for example, that Lieutenant Dan, who was on a 20-foot sailboat outside, who may be a grifter and has there's some reports about him taking out a worker with a violin, which I want to read more about. But he was going to stay on that sailboat. People might have thought the Tropicana Field was there for people who needed shelter. That's not what it was there for.
No, and in fact, it wasn't being used during the storm. It was for after the storm. And the reason I know that, and I knew it in advance, that's what Marlins Park was going to be used for. Not as a shelter during the storm. It's a shelter from the storm. That's a little music.
Well, also for workers who are going to need to be used, and that area is going to need a lot of help because I'm going to say the worst of it might be over, but because more than 2 million people have lost power, because there's been flooding, Tampa was somewhat saved, but St. Petersburg was not, Sarasota was not, cranes falling down. What comes next is also where a lot of people die.
What I want to mention to people, because it worked both on your show, you were raising money for hurricane relief, and for an organization called it's the World Kitchen.
Yes.
And
you're having trouble with your voice today. I'm gonna filibuster for you.
Can you filibuster
a little bit here
as I take a drink? What's the name of your organization?
Thank you for putting me in the spot where I don't know either. I believe it's World Central Kitchen.
That's
WCK. Donate.wck.org/Lebitard if you want to donate. But what you have here, David, is the sense of community that sports provides in a hugely divided time. People need humanizing connection points on some of these things. If the storm doesn't hit you, you feel relieved, even though somebody else is going through the horror of it. And in, for example, North Carolina, you've got bodies being found in trees because of what happens after these storms. To see a place that we can all connect on in Tampa, to see a city impacted that you've heard of, that's not Sanibel Island or one of these beach towns that maybe the country doesn't know, it brings this stuff a little closer to home. It brings the horror of this a little closer.
And so when you agreed to help raise money, which is what we always do and teams do it, you have meetings about, it's one of the most bizarre things that I think about is when we would have meetings about what is the value of the current tragedy. So you look at a storm.
What is the value of the tragedy?
So this is a conversation that you have. The union has it, the league office has it, and individual teams have it. How much are you going to donate? If it's a storm in Tampa, the Rays will donate more than the Marlins, but the Marlins will always donate more to hurricane relief because there's hurricanes in Miami. And then the union thinks about, will it be $1 million? Will it be $2 million? You saw that with Jeff Finnick with Tampa with there's millions of dollars of donations, and then the owners compete, and you look for press releases of what the other teams are doing.
This is unbelievably cutthroat and cold in a way that I know that you traffic in these circles, but the idea of I know, I understand, but competing with other owners to see who could be more altruistic when the altruism is made of commerce and is all about optics instead of, or at least partially about optics instead of about just helping, is just unusually corporate, commercial, and crass.
On the other hand, you can accuse me of that, but at davidsamsonpodcast.com, if you buy merch, I will donate the net proceeds from your purchase to hurricane relief. And that may be crass because we had our biggest day of sales on davidsamsonpodcast.com. Since the merch store opened, day one was the biggest. Yesterday, what my audience, with your help, what they did, that's going to help people.
I didn't say that was crass. I thought the phrasing of figuring out the value of a tragedy, I thought that felt a little crass.
So do you not do that? I'm going to push back because I'm bothered because you put me in this position all the time. Do you not evaluate? There's bad things going on in the world every day, all over. And when you're doing all of your charitable work, you changed and basically galvanized your audience for a hurricane in Tampa. But there's stuff that goes on over in California when the earthquakes happen. Do you galvanize your audience the same way?
It's not quite as strategic as you might think it is. It's just basically when something scares me or hurts my heart, I know our audience is, I believe, one of the most loyal in the history of the medium. We try not to ask them to ask. We try not to ask money of them very often, and just occasionally, because of everything that's happening in general in Florida. And because bodies are being found in trees in North Carolina, there are certain things that reach you, and then you reach out to the audience, and very consistently the audience helps. But I'm not doing math on how it is that the value of a tragedy is.
The people around you are. So when you come up with ideas of things you want to do, or how much money Meadowlark, as an example, would donate to something, I can promise you that Meadowlark, if something happened more on the east coast of Florida, there would be a different view and a call to action than on the west coast of Florida, or in the Gulf, or on the west, something that happens on the Pacific Ocean. And so in sports, it happens. And Tampa Bay's in a situation where the Rays are not in the playoffs, because if they were in the playoffs, there would not be another game happening. There wouldn't be another home game in Tampa. It's unplayable right now, and not just because of the COTS, where first responders could have gone but now will not. It is not. They have to check the structure. Engineers have to come in. I was telling Coca, we have a book, a hurricane book, when Marlins Park was being built. It's what you do during different categories. And I was laughing about Greg Cody wanting a Category 6. That was never in our prep book.
If this had happened last year when the Rays were playing the Rangers and the Rays had advanced in the playoffs, what would they have done? What's the fallback option?
Neutral site. They wouldn't have wanted to go play on the road each of the games.
They might have come down here to play?
They very easily could have done their home games here, depending on the damage here, but they would not have played anywhere in Tampa. And so there'd be no way to clean it up. There'd be no way to make it safe enough to play in Tampa. And so now they start the cleanup in Tampa, and the symbol will be Tropicana Field.
Given that this is a national and international show, and given that we tend to feel these things most when they are closest to home or they happen to the people that we know, do you feel like we're in the middle of something that feels like the apocalypse, when there are 17 tornadoes yesterday, and the Miami Weather Service, which I am used to hearing severe weather announcements, gives more out in a day than they've ever given out in a day, when down here we had it easier than the rest of Florida? Don't you feel like you're living in the middle of the apocalypse?
So I don't feel that. What I did feel, though, is that where I used to live when I lived down here was in West Broward, in Plantation. And all around Western Florida, there were hurricanes, there were tornadoes that were being shown. So I was seeing them on Twitter, and I have friends still who live there, and places where I used to drive. And something happened on I-75 where the hurricanes happened, I-95 right up by Orlando. I was taught, if you have a tornado when you're driving, I thought I was taught that you get out of your car and go into a ditch. Were you taught that?
I have not been taught any tornado training. I don't know
what
any.
Would
I
you
have
have
never
done?
been. I have never been taught anything in terms of how to react to a tornado. My instinct, with no training whatsoever, is just keep going someplace else. That your car can move faster than a tornado away from a tornado if it's not that close.
I'm almost positive that's like saying that someone can outrun a moose, and it turns out that you cannot.
I don't
Or
know
a
how
buffalo.
quickly tornadoes move across Earth. I have gotten no tornado training whatsoever. None. Zero.
So I did get training, and I forgot it all because I was watching video of all these cars on 95. They pulled over. And they didn't. I was waiting for them to get out of the car. It's like the training in an earthquake I got. Did you get earthquake training?
No.
So you don't know what to do in an earthquake?
I only know what to do in a hurricane. That's it.
What do you do in California if an earthquake comes?
I look around and wonder why it is the earth is trembling about 7 seconds after everyone else who lives there and is used to it.
So it sounds like an airplane's coming into your hotel room, an earthquake, but you're supposed to stand in a doorway. So you get out of bed or get off the couch and you go into a door frame and you just stand there. And it's what I did during the major earthquake I was in Hawaii. I was standing there 2 days before the Ironman, in my skivvies in between, and I was looking around, and there was no one else
feeling
in the
safe. So if the earth falls apart, you'll be fine with a doorway around you and in your underwear.
No one else did it, and that's what I was told you're supposed to do. So I thought that I'd see people jumping out of their cars, but they just stayed there. Why didn't they turn their car around and try to go the other way?
That's what I would have done.
Because the people going the south on 95, they didn't pull over because the tornado was in their rearview mirror. They tried to do your plan, the outrunning plan.
I think the outrunning plan, I got to be honest, you can put it on a poll, What is the better way to avoid a tornado? Jump into a ditch or drive as fast as you can the other way?
We're going to get clarification because I'm still going to go with ditch because I don't think you can outrun it.
Okay. I don't think you're particularly safe in an underwear soaked situation under your doorway or in a ditch.
Oh, so you're saying that my whole earthquake thing is wrong too?
I'm saying safety is an illusion in general.
I don't think it's the apocalypse. I think that there are Phillies fans. God, there's no way to do it. There's no way to do it, Coca.
Phillies fans are presently experiencing something that feels pretty terrible. They were up 3-2 at the end of last year, about to advance into wonderful things, and they've lost 5 of 6 playoff games since and only scored 8 runs during those 5 losses. So people will yell about their bullpen and their managing, but they are not hitting in the situations they need to hit in.
They broke a record. The Phillies broke a record, starting with JT Realmuto. There's so many Marlins who are performing in the playoffs, from Ozuna to Stanton. Yelich's team was
Chisholm.
in to JT. He wasn't mine, so I'm not emotionally attached to him. But yes, he is a former Marlin. But the Phillies, their lineup 6-9 had the single worst postseason series ever. They hit below 100. You can't win, and their bullpen stunk. And what I was thinking watching them is about last year, maybe exactly a year ago, when the Phillies made it to the LCS. John Middleton, the owner of the Phillies, wrapped his arms lovingly, fatherly around Bryce Harper and exclaimed to the world, "I underpaid you," which, can you imagine saying that?
Well, I can't imagine you ever saying that to anybody under any emotional circumstance.
It feels like, oh, I paid you this amount of money and you're doing your job by getting us deep into the playoffs.
But David, the way Philadelphia felt with those home crowds when they were winning last year, when they were going up 3-2, when they were that close to tasting all the things that make Dave Dombrowski a Hall of Famer, because he's done it with multiple different teams. If people prefer to blame and yell about the Phillies, we can do that, but I really would like to celebrate the Mets, and I'd like to celebrate particularly because baseball is wonderful and confounding to me this way. Francisco Lindor was paid so much money and was so terrible last year. Uncommonly terrible. He's a great baseball player, and he has changed everything.
Second in the MVP this year.
He has changed everything about the Mets since he moved to the leadoff spot. And what I loved the most about yesterday, I know Philly fans will howl and yell about bullpen and everything else. It's not just that Francisco Lindor hit a grand slam. He rounded the bases like the world's most confident man, like he expected it, and like these are the first of these games that he wants to play in, that he's not interested in being eliminated anytime soon. That felt like he expected to do that. That should have felt like an enormously overwhelming emotional moment, and he looked very comfortable in the middle of it.
He loves being, he's a very smiley guy. Like when I think of Lindor, I think of his smile. It's so magical. But when he hit the home run against Atlanta, that Coke and I were watching the game during the doubleheader a week ago, he had a 9th inning home run, and he did the same thing. Of course I just did that because that's what I do. But you can talk about that more at 9. What I was doing was drawing the bridge from John Middleton to Steve Cohn. John Middleton celebrated the Phillies last year before it was time to celebrate the Phillies because Middleton's view was it's time to win a World Series. Stevie Cohn, when he bought the team, said we're going to get a World Series in 3 to 5 years.
Does anyone other than you call him Stevie? Like that seems
Isn't that his name?
It feels well. I thought it was Steve, and I feel like you're being condescending and you're sort of you're reducing. I feel like that's less respect than he deserves when you make him Little Stevie. You're calling him something that feels childish, and you don't like him.
So just remember that Steve Cohn started it. He disrespected me on Twitter, and since then, it's like Boras and Stevie Cohn.
Okay, because if he called you Davey, Little Davey Sampson, my guess is that you wouldn't like.
Well,
that
I didn't
very
call him
much.
little or big.
Well, but when you
why would he say little? Why would you say little?
When you
to
call
Davey?
him Stevie, you're trying to knock him down a peg. Regardless, you were saying of Stevie Cohn.
So Stephen A. Smith Cohn, he was wearing goggles in the locker room celebrating, and he did a Middleton. It's funny what owners do. Their first reaction, it's not me as the team president thinking about money. Owners do think about it. He said, just to no one in particular, just really to himself, that $341 million looks pretty frickin' good right now. How's that?
Oh, I'll tell you how that is, though, Dave. You were the first one to jump in line and make fun of him when he had all those press conferences at the beginning where little Stevie Cohen was winning all the early press conferences because he was doing the perfect things that fans like. Oh, we got a swaggering owner who doesn't care that he's spending more money than everyone else. And he took so much criticism for that of course, he's going to take his joy and he's going to throw it in everybody's face.
I don't think that he was criticized by owners for spending the way he spent. I don't believe the fans ever criticized.
Well, Mets fans weren't, but you enjoyed. A lot of people enjoyed them losing at the beginning, and much of the losing they've done, at least in part, because he thought he could just buy his way into the game.
And that's still the case where everybody inside baseball is rooting against the Mets because they don't want him to be rewarded for the reckless spending that he's done, much in the same way they're not rooting for the Padres because of the reckless spending that they've done. And so him yelling about Lindor after Lindor hitting the grand slam, although I shouldn't say that I know he yelled. It could have been in a regular voice. It could have been in a quiet voice. It could have been just to his wife. It's unclear, except I don't believe so. So my question is, do you say all that now, but then if, like the Phillies, they fail and don't get into the World Series, don't win the pennant, does Stephen Cohen get quiet again?
I don't police the joy of others. When you get to winning and you decide to celebrate your winning in that moment, I'm not here to tell you that your joy is disproportionate by volume by this many degrees. You have told us the last couple of days, there's winning and there's misery. There's only one winner and everyone else is a loser. But Rafael Nadal is retiring today. He is third in his era. He's the bronze medalist of his era. I am not going to poop on Rafael Nadal because he wasn't as good as those other two robots who are unbelievable. The Mets won now. They are joyous now. They should celebrate that. That looked like it felt really good. Knocking off that team because those fan bases hate each other and those teams don't particularly like each other either.
I think that you're doing apples to oranges in order to try to make me look a certain way. You'd agree that I'm not saying anything about Nadal's career. When you finish third or the runner-up in the French Open, that's not put on your resume and discussed.
My point is that Rafael Nadal is the third best player of his generation, and that's worthy of celebration, being the third best anything. The Mets may end up being the third best team in the sport. All we know right now is the chance they had to win against the Phillies. They won, and I'm not here to tell them how to enjoy that.
I wish that I had been paying more attention to DraftKings and thinking about series winners because I had the Phillies winning the series because I thought the Phillies.
You kept picking them in your pick of the day. You kept picking the Phillies, at least in part because you hate little Stevie Cohen.
No, because it was hard for me to imagine that the Phillies offense would set records and their great bullpen would stink that many games in a row. One game it happens, but it's hard to imagine when you're outside of it. Believing in the pixie dust is really much harder.
David, this stuff in the postseason is so small sample size fragile that all the Phillies did is in the last two seasons, their bats went cold in 5 out of the 6 wrong games. That's what happened. That happens during the season. The Phillies had a stretch like that this season. It's impossible to win these baseball games, even if you have Zach Wheeler. They lost one of them when Wheeler pitched well. If all you're going to do in 5 games is score 8 runs, do you know how hard it is to do to win playoff games if in 5 games you're going to score 8 runs?
And now they go home. And now you've got the possibility of the Mets making it to the World Series, and the possibility still exists of Mets and Yankees. And so I wanted to talk about the Yankees because, one, I love Giancarlo Stanton, personally, off the field and on the field. I can't stand the way he's criticized. I can't stand the way he is maligned when the fact is he is maybe the most clutch playoff player the Yankees have had since Jeter. But he has no rings yet, so we can't say it. But when you look at what Stanton does in the playoffs, he's amongst the best in terms of power hitting in the history of baseball.
1 home run every 9 at-bats in the playoffs behind only Babe Ruth.
So that seems good. Let's start with that. So Stanton comes up. He hits a home run. The Yankees win the game.
Steals a base, too.
Yes, he hadn't stolen a base since 2020. It's not that he – so here's what you're taught. That's not really a stolen base, though it is statistically. He's a smart player. When you are given a base, you take it. to get into scoring position, no matter whether your legs hurt, whether they don't hurt, whether your ankle's bad or your hamstrings are
They
tight.
just clearly didn't think he was going anywhere because he's so slow, because his body at this point, even though he's statuesque, he runs like a statue.
So he's not that slow. That's another misconception that Bob Costas has promulgated. He doesn't want to go full speed because he thinks that he will get hurt and he's more valuable hitting than he is.
It does make him slow, though. I understand the distinction you're making. It's one of semantics. When he's moving around the bases, because he's being so careful, he's one of the slowest movers in the sport.
I ain't never seen anybody boo a bum. I agree with Jazz. I don't think I've ever seen anybody boo someone who they don't care about, who they're not angry at, who's not good. Why would I spend my time booing a crappy player?
Well, in today's America,
Boo anybody?
It's not just boo anybody. If it's the swaggering black guy in a baseball uniform, that guy's going to get booed for a lot of different reasons. That's not just performance, especially in that sport.
So what you took what happened in Kansas City, which happens to be the home of the Negro League Museum, one of the best museums. If you've never been to it, I strongly encourage it before the next apocalypse. Did you view that as yelling because he was black?
The flamboyant black guy in sports is going to get some booing. Yes. He's going to get more booing. It'll happen to Bryce Harper as well. But the flamboyant, the arrogant black guy, David, yes.
Wait, Jazz Chisholm said you guys got lucky winning a game.
Uh-huh.
You think that only he got booed because he's black and said that?
I didn't hear an only come out of my mouth. That was absolutism you put in my mouth.
So the answer is that was just made the boos louder?
It can be also instead of only. It can be that they don't like what he said, and also they're going to have less leeway for a guy who's the arrogant black guy just because that's real.
I tend to try to give people the benefit of the doubt, no matter how many times I'm
what America are you living in right now? Giving people the reason of the doubt right now when there's just a racist monster truck moving through the Republican Party?
I just know who I boo, and I boo without regard to race and color.
Okay.
I boo with regard to someone poo-pooing on me.
I look at you. You put the boo in Buddha. That's how wonderful you are as a person who just sits in the middle of all the divisiveness, seeing no color and seeing peace at every turn.
I'm acting like a Buddha right now if you're not watching this. I'm trying to be very peaceful and calm. As I thought about my friend Bob Costas calling the game, he's getting so much hate, saying that he's over the hill. Someone said he needed to start drinking coffee. He needed to get a shot of that thing that makes you young again.
Aging stinks. This is one of the best broadcasters of any kind in my entire lifetime. He has an interesting baseball relationship over the last 15 years or so where people don't like so much when he comes over to the sport, and he has always broadcasted it very well, but he had a tough time yesterday. He called a hit up the middle, a single, when it was, caught by the shortstop or the second baseman, and aging stinks, man. And his standard has been very high for a long time. And Bob Costas is at the point where he is now a polarizing broadcaster, even as I said. In terms of craftsmen, there have been very few in the history of television. I'm not talking about just sports. I'm not even talking about really just television. In the history of talking in front of people, there have been very few people who have done it better in my lifetime than Bob Costas.
We had him as a sit-down on Nothing Personal a couple times, I think. Certainly once, maybe twice. And I've known him for a quarter of a century. And we had an honest talk after last year's playoffs. Because this isn't just new. For people new to the criticizing game, he was criticized after last year's run, where he was also a broadcaster on Turner. And he and I talked about it. And I just can't remember whether it was on the air or off the air. I just know that his view was, I can't hit, and this is what he said, I can't hit the 98-mile-an-hour fastball. But what I can do is when I'm up at bat, if there is a meatball, I can still hit it a mile. And that, I think, is what he was saying is his concession to aging, is that the bat speed has slowed down. But like Yuli Gurriel, there's still a spot for him in the sport. But last night felt like people had had enough.
It's been happening for a few years to him. I have never understood how, in general, the broadcaster is one of the most polarizing things that fans have attitudes about, no matter who's doing the broadcasting on their games. It's a delicate dance, and he's done it very well for a long time, but it is not forgiving to age in that position.
So is this the time that Turner is going to – is this it? Is there enough? Because last year wasn't, and there was so much heat on him, people forget. And that's the funny thing when you're an executive is that when there's criticism happening, it can feel like recency bias is overwhelming you, but then he comes back next year.
Well, what I see a lot of is a lot of 35-year-old executives as tech companies take things over who don't have any respect for the past and for history when that sport does have a lot of respect for its past and history. And so I always wonder how much criticism those kinds of leaders are willing to take because they understand who it is that deserves the respect at the end of their career.
Is that Jerry Jones firing Tom Landry? Is that this type of young person comes in, has no respect for the institution that was the Cowboys, but then goes on a run with a Jimmy Johnson?
You're firing Bob Costas. That's not something that exists in my mind as something that's possible to do. Like that, to me, Bob Costas ends his career on his terms because I respect the body of work. I've heard Bob Costas' criticism. Look, he speaks from on high a lot. I am afflicted with this particular disease, sanctimonious, like that he is speaking as if he's smarter than you, often because he is smarter than you, and the way he delivers things can be off-putting to others. I happen to respect the way that he does that, but I could see I see the same thing in the mirror sometimes, where I can be someone who talks down to people, and when those people fail, or those people make mistakes in public, people really enjoy it.
But are you going to take away the microphone before someone takes it from you? I mean, you have your own company, so in theory, what you've done is bought the microphone. But the question is, do you have the self-awareness? Because athletes do not. You have to rip the jersey off their back.
I have always said that confidence is the last thing to go, and the mirror is the last thing to know. So Bob Costas has always been better than everybody else. I don't know how much stumbling around he is willing to do before he allows a 35-year-old executive to let him go. I didn't think we were there yet.
I found myself cringing for him out of love and respect for him because I was watching real time the 35-year-olds react who don't have any sense of history about it, and I was wondering how people perceive that, because I think about that with myself a bit too.
But they do it to Joe Buck as well, and he's a prodigy. Like, none of these people could do these jobs as well as the people who are doing them. So this is a position
that's not new,
that gets a great deal of criticism in general. I saw all that criticism, and why suddenly, as someone who has seen the criticism that I have gotten here on this show this week and that you have gotten on my show this week, you cannot govern yourself by those impressions, the principles of others.
I certainly don't, but I'm talking about self-awareness, because my view of this week is that this was beneficial to the audience of Nothing Personal and to the audience of the Dan Le Batard Show, because I don't want stagnant when in what we traffic in, that's death.
Bob Costas loves what he does for a living and, to my thinking, has earned the ending that he wants.
I'm only pausing because that is everybody's dream, to get the ending that you want. I'm just not aware of many people who ever get the ending that they want, all the way from death down to what happens in your career.
You say that, but ESPN is being very gentle with Dick Vitale and Lee Corso as they work well into their 80s and through sickness because they respect the body of work. This is an indictment to me, not of the people involved and not of a culture that is more cruel than it's ever been on social media. To me, it's an indictment of corporate culture that at ESPN, they actually respect those people have done those jobs at that place for that long, that they allow them to be mascots at the end in a way that has great grace.
So there's a difference about who's the lead broadcaster and who's not in those examples, because Bob Costas is and Dick isn't. But I want to go on because we're talking about broadcasters, and the biggest story of the day yesterday was not Bob Costas. The biggest story, which is such a distraction, was actually Ken Rosenthal. Ken Rosenthal is a baseball insider. He is the Shams of baseball, along with Jeff Passan.
He's excellent. Has been excellent for a long time.
Forever, since he was we loathed him in front offices because he had connections so deep into the organization that he would get things that we did not want him to get, and that we would end up having to give him things in order to try to get trades with him, which never worked. Nightmare to deal with as an insider, but he's also a sideline reporter for Fox, and he's also a writer for The Athletic. And he wrote an article about the Padres and about the players, and he's covering the Padres-Dodgers series for FS1 and for Fox. And it turns out that the Padres were so upset about what Rosenthal wrote about them because he had something to say about Profar, he had something to say about Machado, and he had something to say about Tatis.
Machado was punkish behavior, throwing a ball at Dave Roberts. Tatis was
I didn't know what this meant.
A peacock, that he's flamboyant and he's into himself.
Is that an insult?
It's an accurate assessment that was taken as an insult.
No, but when someone's called a peacock, that is a negative?
It depends on whether you are a humble person and conservative or whether you're somebody who tries to protect baseball's cathedrals the way that Brian McCann would, because you don't want young Latin players to be pelvic thrusting in right field with the Dodger audience.
And then Profar. Profar was the one who caught Betts' home run, caught it, although couldn't catch it the next two games, and the Dodgers crushed San Diego. They're going to a Game 5. He called Profar the guy at school who I could totally relate to, who steals your lunch money and then says, who, me? Like, I didn't do that. I know those people. So I didn't find that to be so outrageous, but the Padres did, and they wouldn't let him in the dugout. For an article he wrote in The Athletic, they wouldn't let him in the dugout as a Fox reporter, and it became a major distraction.
I didn't think it was the biggest story in the sport yesterday, but I did think it was a meaty content story for a number of different reasons. I don't know how many people in your audience care about this. The job that
Thank you.
Rosenthal, well, this part of it, right? Because this is real journalism stuff that I'm fascinated by. I'd love to talk to you about this for an hour, but I tend to find more so than ever, given what the orange clown has done to journalism through calling it fake news at every turn, I tend to find this part of sports coverage really interesting. Rosenthal is supposed to be impartial, objective in his role on television. This was a written article, and God bless, I am thrilled to see a written article still matter in a major league clubhouse, but it had opinions in it, and it wasn't impartial. It was, it had some acid on it, even if I don't think it's insulting to call someone a peacock. He went after, and this part's interesting, David, he went after their flamboyant Latin guys, and he's got a history as the old white guy of doing some of this in protection of the Brian McCann sensibilities of the sport. I know you don't like this, David, but
because I'm the old white guy who he went after for 18 years.
And I'm the old Latin guy who's watched for 30 years the way that Latin guys are too flamboyant for this game. I've watched that for 30 years, and it bothers me.
I can't say that Ken Rosenthal, when he does hit pieces, which he's been doing his entire career, this was not the first time he ventured into negativity. I assure
you that it's not just the words that those three particular guys are noticing. I assure you, having talked to Latin players in their native language for 30 years in major league clubhouses, that all of them are noticing, why is this one dude coming after our Latin guys this way? It happens to be because the Latin guys are the most flamboyant guys, by the way.
And it happens to be that they just don't pay attention when he goes after the white guys or the black guys.
He does that too.
He goes after everybody. That is Ken Rosenthal.
But he got boycotted by the three power brokers in this clubhouse. It wasn't the other guys. It's these three guys, and one of whom was making love with the Dodger right field audience the other day after hitting home runs against it.
While having bottles thrown at him. So I'm trying to...
Why didn't he mention Jackson Merrill? Is it a fair question to ask? Why is it just the three guys? Is it a fair question to ask? Because I guarantee you that's the reason they're boycotting him.
You're asking whether or not Jackson Merrill deserved to get called something in the way those three guys did. Because he's the white rookie of the year.
This is what I'm telling you. When I read the story, the first thing, I don't expect this to happen to you, but I've been doing this for 30 years, and people can call me a race baiter if they want. The first thing that I noticed is he went after the three Latin guys. That's why they're boycotting him.
And that's why you are that. And so that's what you see. The first thing that I saw is, I know these players. I've known Tatis Jr. since he was 2 years old because we had his father in Montreal, like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. There's no look at me, Louis, on this show, but now I'm seeing kids who were kids like were running around the studio yesterday. Imagine if any of the kids around the studio yesterday ended up being big leaguers in front of a microphone. You would remember this.
I don't want the audience to misunderstand what I'm saying, though, David. These players are flamboyant, and that tends to be a problem in that sport, whether they're Latin players or whether they're Jazz Chisholm or whether they're Bryce Harper. That sport is conservative, or has been historically, when it comes to this stuff, and Ken Rosenthal has covered it for a long time as someone who is conservative protector of the sacred things in that sport.
But it's been written about as though the boycott was this epiphany that Ken Rosenthal had it out for San Diego, had it out for these flamboyant Latin players. And the articles are covering it in the exact way you're talking about it. You're not forging new ground here, but you're going right to the lowest common denominator of escalation.
I didn't even think peacock was an insult. Fernando Tatis Jr. is a peacock. Like, I'm not saying that this is racist. What I am saying is that I noticed the race in it. It's okay for different races to have different sensibilities about things like baseball, and it's okay for people to object to it. But he was boycotted because he did it to their three flamboyant Latin guys.
But is it okay to boycott that? Because then where does that stop? If you're Major League Baseball or you're Fox, so the call is, hey, this guy can't do his job right now, and the call goes to the front office of the Padres. I know these calls. Because when your players don't do a post-game interview or an in-game interview, you get the calls from the commissioner's office. It's their job. You cannot stop someone from doing their job. Ken's job is to get in-game interviews, and you've got to say yes. They don't like it, not because it's Ken Rosenthal. They wouldn't like it if God or Jimi Hendrix were doing the in-game interview, but it's their job. What right do they have? That's my only point is there is no right to stop someone from doing their job.
But you have pitted two of my sensibilities against each other, which is I am also a reporter, or I have been in my career. So I'm not just a Hispanic person. I am also someone who has done something similar to that job. And when you say, should they boycott him? No, they shouldn't boycott him. But I understand why it is that millionaires with a lot of power would throw a baby temper tantrum because they don't like in a newspaper article, of all things. I know it's on the internet, but this is a newspaper type of article. This is a former newspaper reporter writing an old school column that has pissed them off with what I thought was pretty benign stuff, by the way. Calling Machado punkish for throwing a ball at Dave Roberts.
Which he didn't throw at Dave Roberts.
Right. Calling Tatis a peacock. I thought that they were overly sensitive people in this circumstance, even as I argue on behalf of understanding why Latin guys would get a little prickly around this.
We're going to pay some bills. This is going to be, I'm so happy you're here to watch this. Ready?
Commerce.
Nothing personal pick of the day, presented by DraftKings. Stay tuned because you'll hear more about DraftKings and all it has to offer throughout the show. DraftKings, the crown is yours. All right, Coca. Sorry.
I don't feel like you've gotten a lot of these right.
No,
I feel like you've gotten these
that
picks
was
wrong.
right. No. Oh, that's not true. The picks have been outstanding, but I need to do that way better because stop making me smile.
Okay.
This is serious.
Okay.
Nothing personal pick of the day, presented by DraftKings. Stay tuned because you'll hear more about DraftKings and all it has to offer throughout the show. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Tonight, we have a baseball game and a football game. Competition. Let's talk football first. The Seahawks started the season undefeated, have now lost 2 in a row, going against the Niners 2-3. Shanahan not performing. Guess what? It's going to continue. Take the 3.5. Odds subject to change, but I'm taking the 3.5. Seahawks, Niners. Baseball. Yankees trying to close out the Kansas City Royals. Garrett Cole trying to actually be the ace that he is not any longer, going against Michael Wacha in a Game 1 rematch.
Also an ace that is no longer an ace any longer.
He was never an ace.
Oh, Wacha.
And we're in the middle of a segment.
Sorry, but Wacha was an ace.
He wasn't an ace.
He was at the top of that rotation. Was Carpenter the ace?
Being on the top of rotation does not make you an ace. Okay, can we get back
to
what we were doing?
Sorry.
Yankees minus 155 over the Royals. Those are your nothing personal pick of the days presented by DraftKings. Are we good? Your mic's back on now.
I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, but you're not leading. You're used to leading the show. This is my show.
Understood.
And we're going now to a different Tropicana. There's a lot going on in Vegas. Have you ever seen a building imploded?
I have, but you've covered this story better than most people have covered this Oakland A's story.
It's still going. And there was a major thing that happened that people think is major that wasn't major at all, because it's when land's being redeveloped, you have to get rid of what's on the land. And the way you do it is not with a bulldozer. You actually put dynamite in and do it. So John Fisher, the owner of the A's, brought himself to Vegas, which is the last place he ever wants to be, in my opinion. And he watched this. We have video of it, Coca. It's sound, not video? Sound. Oh,
It's good sound.
so this is the sound, and if you're watching, you can see it. I used to love it. It's the first place I ever stayed when I turned 21 in Tropicana. I can see the room where I stayed just getting destroyed. Opening up this land. Look at it go down. I would never want to be anywhere near that.
This is the only place that I've ever seen this happen. I've not seen it in any other city in the United States. Although Dak Prescott did this yesterday with his mansion as well.
That was with a bulldozer, though. It was literally, that was the thing with the front. I wish I knew the name, but I'm a city boy. The thing that has the thing in front, the front loader. It may be called a front loader. Or no, that's probably
You're
not what
asking
it's
the
called.
wrong person,
geez.
but I do like you explaining this as a man of words. The thing in front of the thing, and then just going with front loader.
So the first things that come to my mind is backhoe and front loader.
Maybe it's the dozer in a bulldozer.
Either way, Dak Prescott didn't use dynamite, which would have been faster, but he is getting rid of his house, I assume, to build a new one. That's common in Florida, not the dynamite, the bulldozer. So John Fisher comes over, and he starts meeting the media and talking about his team moving to Vegas. And all anyone wants to talk about is where's the money, because there's been no update on him funding an actual new ballpark.
You believe that this is all still something that they're doing as a Penn and Teller magic trick, that they don't that you have been very strong in saying that team will never be in Vegas.
Have you ever taken a position where you feel like it has to start eroding, but you don't want to be in the middle of the erosion? So either you're going to stay strong or you're going to reverse. That's how I feel now, and I can't reverse yet, so I'm forced to stay strong because I don't want to erode.
I have often been wrong both ways because I have the original opinion. I get shaken on the conviction of the original opinion. I change my opinion, and then my original opinion was right.
And then you pretend you didn't change it?
No, I just do what I just did now,
So
which is I'm
twice?
wrong both times. That's correct.
That's
but
the
you're
worst
you're
plan
stuck
ever.
right now because you
I'm
have said
stuck.
like they're not going back to Oakland.
I'm not even willing to say that. They're not going back to the Coliseum. They need a new owner. They need a new ballpark. And John Fisher telling us that we feel really good about where we're at. Well, where they're at is there's no development agreement still. There's no non-relocation agreement. There's no construction agreement. There's no financing. And then he said something that he thinks that no one paid attention to, which is that construction needs to start sometime in the second quarter of next year. That's the wrong math to open in 28. You can't start construction quarters in a year. There's 3 months in a quarter. That means what he is saying is start construction in April, because he wants people to say, oh, that makes sense. The season starts in April of 28. That's not how you build a facility. It's more than 36 months because you've got to get it open in February, because you've got to figure out how the systems work. You don't just open a ballpark and host a major league game. There are myriad things that have to happen.
You're saying that's too fast. They can't do it in 3 years.
They got to start the 3 years sooner. So he made a mistake by saying we were going to start in the second quarter. You have to start in the first quarter of 25 to be ready for 28. And so him throwing that out means they don't even have a timeline because they don't have documents. You need construction documents to get a timeline. So he's missing all these things, but he goes in front of this implosion and stands there next to the head of Bally's. Hey, we're good. This is exactly how it's all supposed to be. But then he opens his mouth and he comes out looking like a dolt.
You're going to be wrong here, though, aren't you?
There's a decent chance.
They're going to be in Vegas. They're going to be in Vegas before 2030.
Oh, well, wait a minute.
They're going to be in Vegas. No, you said
I'll
they
be
weren't
wrong
going to
if that
move.
happens.
They're going to be in Vegas. They're not going to be in Oakland.
I do have a wait to see that is pending that they will not be in Vegas and that an NBA team will be.
Okay.
And I'm not willing to go off it quite yet.
Okay, because then you'd be wrong twice.
which I only want to be wrong
Right.
once,
Okay,
which I think
it's
makes
better.
perfect
It's better
sense.
that way. Sure.
It's the end of the week with you. I'll be back tomorrow with Nothing Personal. For the audience, it will be back to me in the abyss. I have loved not being in the abyss for these 4 days, and I appreciate the audience's willingness to actually engage with something different from time to time.
Thank you for having me. I thank both you and Coca and also the audience.
The thing about our show is that having a second voice is interesting to me because you and I, off the field, on the field, don't always agree. On the other hand, I'm appreciative every day to what we've built as we enter into our 50th-year anniversary coming up next week. See you tomorrow. It's just business. This is Nothing Personal.